Good day. We are the group 4 from BSE 3 and we are about to discuss lesson 4 of the subject literary criticism, which is entitled Reader Response Criticism. For the unit 1, what is reader response criticism? Reader response criticism is considered readers' reaction to literature as vital to interpreting the meaning of the text, can take a number of different approaches. Theory can use a psychoanalytic lens, a feminist lens, or even a structuralist lens. Reader response theory identifies the significant role of the reader in constructing textual meaning. In acknowledging the reader's essential role, reader response diverge from early text-based views found in new criticism or brain-based psychological perspective related to reading. Tyson explains that reader response theories share two beliefs. First, that the role of the reader cannot be omitted from our understanding of literature. And second, readers do not passively consume the meaning presented to them by an objective literary text. Rather, they actively make the meaning they find in the literature. A literary text is brought into existence by means of transactional process, in which a reciprocal bond between text and the reader is created because the literary work cannot be completely identical with the text or the realization of the text, but in fact must lie halfway between the two. Reading rests on a continuum from aesthetic to efferent in reader response theory, while the aesthetic reference while the aesthetic refers to the feelings and thoughts of the readers. The efferent stance turns the attention towards the information the readers draw upon the end of the reading. In this reader response theory explained by Tyson, reader is the most necessary and cannot be separated in the criticism information. Next slide. Modern response criticism began in 1960s and 70s, particularly in US and Germany. This movement shifted the focus from the text to the reader and argues that effective response is a legitimate point for departure in criticism. Its conceptualization of critical practice is distinguished from theories that favor textual autonomy. There is no denying that there are several literary theories which paid some attention to specific role of reader in interpreting the meaning of piece of literary work. However, reader response criticism as modern literary philosophy emerged between 1960s and 80s, particularly in Germany and US. Typically, reader response criticism revolves around the phenomena reading response to reading. The theory identifies the reader as a significant and active agent who is responsible to impart the real meaning of the text by interpreting it. The modern school and the modern school of thought argues on on the existing perception of the literature. According to it, literature is like performing an art that enables reader to create his own text-related unique performance. It stood against the other theories of new criticism and formalism, which totally ignored the reader's role in recreating the meaning. New criticism considered that only structure, form, and content, or whatever is within the text, create the meaning. There was no appeal to the author's intention or his authority. None of this single element was focused on the new critics or orthodox. Classic reader response critics includes Norman Holland, Stanley Fish, Wolfgang Iser, Hans Robert Choss, and Roland Barthes. First, Norman Holland. He was over a long career explored how the human relates to literature. In the course of this inquiry, he has written the 12 books and over 200 articles in popular and professional magazines in America and abroad. He has lectured all over the world, not only in such familiar places as London, Paris, Rome, or Berlin, but in Sapporo, Benares, and even Kathmandu. Writing of his have been translated into Chinese, Dutch, French, German, Italian, Japanese, Korean, Magyar, Russian, and Spanish. He is best known for his books concentrating psychoanalytic and cognitive psychology on literary questions. Psychoanalysis and Shakespeare in 1966, The Dynamics of Literary Response in 1968, and more. Next is Stanley Fish. Stanley Fish, or known as Stanley Eugene Fish, born in 1938, is an American literary critic, particularly associated with reader response criticism, according, according to which the meaning of a text is created rather than discovered rather than discovered. Fish's most famous book is probably How to Write a Sentence, going beyond the standard diagramming that took up your elementary school language art class. Fish explores why great writing is great writing. Next is Wolfgang Iser. He is a German literary scholar, best known for establishing reception theory. Together with his colleague Hans Joss, he is the founder of Constant School of Reception Aesthetics, which has had a significant influence in Anglo-American reader response criticism. He was born in Germany and studied literature in Leipzig and Tübingen as an undergraduate. He then completed a PhD in English at Heidelberg, writing a dissertation on the work of the 18th century English novelist Henry Fielding. His most significant books are Del Implicite Leser, Communication for Men, des Romans von Bunyabi Beckett in 1972, translated as The Implied Reader and more. Next one is Hans Robert Choss. He is also a German literary theorist, best known for establishing receptionist aesthetics. Together with his colleague Wolfgang Iser, he is the founder of Constant Constant School, which had a significant influence in Anglo-American reader response criticism. Born in Germany, Joe studied in Isling and Gieselingen in 1939. He joined the army and saw service on the Russian front. He was briefly imprisoned at the end of the war as an enemy combat, thus delaying his university studies. In 1948, he completed his undergraduate and postgraduate degree at the University of Heidelberg, graduating in 1957 with a dissertation on Marcel Proust. Between 1959 and 1966, Joss held a job in Munster and Gießen. Last one classic reader response critics is Ronald Barthes, or known in his full name, Ronald Gerald Barthes. He is a French essayist and social literary critic whose writing on semiotic and formal study of symbols and sign pioneered by Ferdinand de Saussure helped establish structuralism and the new criticism as leading intellectual movement. His famous work it was including are including Writing Degree Zero in 1953, Mythologies in 1957, Criticism and Truth in 1966, and more. Barthes died at the age of 64 after injuries sustained in a car accident. That is that is all for my part. This is Kaisip Bianca Marie, and for the next reporter,
For the continuation of Unit 1, I am Jervin Blesa, the next reporter. So today I will discuss the 5 types or variations about reader response criticism. Lois Tyson classified the variation into 5 recognized reader response criticism approaches, whilst warning that categorizing reader response theories explicitly invites difficulty due to their overlapping beliefs and practices. The first one is the transactional reader response theory. Led by Louis Rosenblatt and supported by Wolfgang Iser, involves a transaction between the text, inferred meaning, and the individual interpretation by the reader influenced by their personal, emotional, and knowledge. It is analyzes the transaction between the text and the reader. The theory doesn't reject the importance of the text in favor of the reader, rather claims that both are necessary in the production of meaning. It is also explained that there is a transaction between the reader and the text which enable the reader himself creates meaning. The second one is the affective stylistic. Established by Fish, believe that a text can only come into existence as it is read. Therefore, a text cannot have meaning independent of the reader. It is derived from analyzing further notion that a literary text is an event that occurs in time, that comes into being as it is read, rather than object that exists in space. The text is examined closely, often line by line, or even word by word, in order to understand how it affects the reader in the process of reading. So the next one is subjective reader response theory. Associated with David Bletch, looks entirely to the reader's response for literary meaning as individual written responses to a text are then compared to other individual interpretation to find continuity of meaning. It believes that the reader responses are the text and that all meaning of text lies in the reader's interpretation. So let's go for the psychological reader's response theory. Employed by Norman Holland, believes that readers' motives heavily affect how they read and subsequently use this reading to analyze the psychological response of the reader. Norman Holland believes that readers' motives are strongly influence how they read. Holland focuses on what readers' interpretations reveal about themselves and not about the text. And the last one is the social reader response theory. Is Stanley Fish extension of his earlier work, stating that any individual interpretation of a text is created in an interpretive community of minds consisting of participants who share a specific reading and interpretation strategy. According to Fish, social reader response theory is what we take to be our individual subjective responses to literature. Our literature are really the products of the interpretative communities in which we belong. So that's would be all for the Unit 1.
So for the next reporter, I am Lynette Anpascasio Cabadin. I will discuss the Unit 2, characteristic of reader response criticism. Number 1, reader response criticism places strong emphasis on the reader's role in producing the meaning of a literary work. It is some senses an opposite approach from that of formalism. Whereas formalists treat meaning as objectively inherent in the text, in reader response criticism, the text has no meaning until it is read by a reader who creates the meaning. Unlike the formalist critical approach, this type of literary criticism insists that works are not universal, that is, that they will not always mean more or less the same thing to readers everywhere. So for the possible positive aspect of using reader response criticism, 1. Literature points toward actual human situation and feelings. Multiple interpretations are allowed, but readers must think for themselves. Encourages discussion of text and creates diversity in the difference of opinions, allowing readers to see a different views of a text. Makes literary criticism as continuous process and prevents the formation of statistic relationship between the text and its actual meaning. So, but the possible negative aspect of using reader's response criticism, everyone's reading can be considered valid and devalues the content of the text. Some argue that the text is ignored completely. The work can change in meaning and application over time or context. It could potentially suppress the reader's ability to gain knowledge, experience, and insight from the text. Typical question to be asked when reading as reader response critic. How does the interaction of text and reader create meaning? What does a phrase-by-phrase analysis of a short literary text or a key portion of a longer text tell us about the reading experience structured by built into the text? Do the sound shapes of the words as they appear on the page or how they are spoken by the reader enhance or change the meaning of the word or work? How might we interpret a literary text to show the reader's response is analogous to the topic of the story? What does the body of criticism published about a literary text suggest about the critics who interpreted the text and or about the reading experience produced by the text? Tyson 191. So for the do's and don'ts of using reader response criticism, for the do's, view a text openly. Consider your own opinion towards the text. Interpret the text in any way you choose. Consider your reaction to what you read in the text. So for the don'ts, view the text through someone else's perspective. Consider what meaning the author may have been trying to portray. So that's all for my part. Thank you for listening.
I am Caitlin Arjones and I'm going to discuss the advantages and disadvantages of using reader response criticism. Advantages of using reader response criticism. Number 1, reader response criticism allows reader to interpret the text in various ways. Number 2, allows readers to bring personality traits and memories of the past and present experiences to the text. Number 3, forces the readers to look past the words of the text and search for deeper meanings. Number 4, allows teachers to connect with their students on a more personal level. Number 5, allows readers to see different perspectives of others while reading. Number 6, readers' response criticism focuses on the importance of the reader and their individual response to the text. This theory allows readers to interpret the text in an endless amount of ways. It allows readers the opportunity to become personal when reading the text. They can bring their own feelings, memories, beliefs, and etc. It gives the readers an opportunity to search for a deeper meaning than is often required when reading, allows connection between teachers and students, text and reader, and etc. Reader response criticism promotes self-reflective reading and give us words with which to talk about what we have always experienced, but unawares and always talk about, but absurdly. The method gives the reader freedom when dealing with text. The text remains alive as it is interpreted in the present context of the reader. It makes the reader active and not passive, as in formalism. Disadvantages of using reader response criticism. Number 1. Reader response criticism provides a much skewed outlook on different works of literature. Number 2. One brings their personal interpretations to the text rather than examining the meaning that the other created. Number 3. The reader creates a narrow connection to the text rather than looking at different perspectives, connections to the world, connection to other texts. Number 4. Students may be unclear of how to respond correctly because they are unsure of the teacher's own perspective and how they will react to their own response. It provides a rather skewed outlook on literature. Readers may focus on their own reaction and interpretations of the text rather than the message the author is attempting to portray, may cause more one-track focus rather than a broadened outlook both on literature and the world, may cause stress for students as they are not sure that what they believe to see in the work is what the teacher is necessarily looking for. Readers spend more time focused on themselves than the literature being shown to them. The weakness of using reader response criticism is that this method is not comprehensive. The method does not do everything that can be done and ought to be done in biblical studies. The Bible is not literature in the conventional sense. A reduction of the Bible to secular literature would seem to be illegitimate. The fact that the reader responds criticism to the Bible grows out of literary study of fictional literature, primary novels, makes such an approach suspect to some. Historical critical readers see in readers' response criticism a lack of regard for the intention of the author. However, some believe that reader response criticism does not ignore the author and the intention of the author, but the construction of the author and the author's intentions is taken to be only a penultimate strategy in reader response criticism. That's all for my part. Thank you for listening.
I am Jason J. De Leon, and I am the last reporter for this lesson and the one who will discuss the Unit 3, how to write a reader response criticism. When using reader response criticism as a tool of analysis, we may 1. Write about how the author evokes a particular reaction in you as the reader. 2. What features of your own identity influence you in creating your interpretation? And last, how another reader in a different situation might interpret the work differently. So in writing a reader response criticism, we should take these questions as a guide. Does the text have anything to do with your personal life? Does it hold the same opinion or perspective in the world as you have? Like what are the things to consider wrong and why? Use an example like quotes that should raise or an argument that discuss with your opinion. Second, what is the learning or does the text challenge your opinion? If yes, how it challenge and how it change your perspective? What is there you like? What is there you like the most in the text? Reflect critically how could it have been better? Lastly is conclude your reading by responding your overall reaction and recommendation. So for the next slide is the sample of illustration of a reader's response criticism. In the reading of parable of the prodigal son in the New Testament, different readers are likely to have different responses. Some of them are these. Some who has lived in a fairly straight and narrow life and who does not feel like he has been rewarded for it is likely to associate with the older brother of the parable and sympathize with his opposition to the celebration over the prodigal son's return. Second is, while the parable might disturb some, it could elicit a feeling of relief from others. Last, third is, some with a more checkered past would probably approach the parable with more sympathy for the younger brother. And lastly is, as a parent who had difficulties with a rebellious child, would probably focus on the father and depending on his or her experience, might see the father's unconditional acceptance of the prodigal as either good or merciful or as unwise and overindulgent. So that's conclude our report. Thank you for listening.